Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. Me llamo Chris Ferry, and this is my co-host.
Me llamo Chris Huddleston.
And today we are over the moon excited to welcome you to our 50th episode.
We need one of those air horn things.
Yum, 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 yum. That's so great.
We don't have the sound effect, but
I know.
we can do it
wish
ourselves.
I see myself peeking out here on the air horn. I'm going to have to try and fix that in post. Anyway, you could tell that we are very excited. And today we have chosen a special humdinger. For today, we are going to be talking about the film Highlander.
From another time comes a man of great power.
Talk funny, Nash. Where are you from?
Lots of different places. A warrior of incredible strength.
You've the devil in you.
We've been kinsmen 20 years.
Connor MacLeod was my kinsman. I don't know who you are.
Because you were born different, men will fear you, try to drive you away.
A man uncertain of his future.
What you got here, Brenda, is a guy who's been creeping around since at least 1700.
It's not possible.
And haunted by his past.
Wait a minute, Nash. I want some answers.
You cannot die, MacLeod.
I am Conor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod. I was born in 1518 in the village of Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel. Now I am immortal.
A hero who is about to face his greatest challenge.
You will always be weaker than I.
What can you tell me about a 7-foot lunatic hacking away with a broadsword at 1 o'clock in the morning, New York City, 1985?
Not much.
For he is not alone.
In the end, there can be only one.
Highlander. There can be only one.
Okay, excellent trailer. So much to talk about. Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do, Mr. Ferry. Highlander is a 1986 film. It was directed by Russell Mulcahy, and it stars Christopher Lambert, Roxanne Hart, Clancy Brown, Sean Connery, and others. None of these people I really know who they are.
Surely you've heard of Sean Connery.
No, but I mean the other people other than them. There's a bunch of actors that are listed that I'm not familiar with, but
Fair enough.
and the synopsis is an immortal Scottish swordsman must confront the last of his immortal opponents, a murderously brutal barbarian who lusts for the fabled quote unquote prize.
That old chestnut.
That old chestnut.
So
All right,
it's
Chris,
this dusty story told again.
Exactly. Why do they just keep doing this over and over again? So what did you think? What's your history with Highlander?
Well, I have not seen Highlander a bunch. I've seen it more than once, but it's been a long time since I last watched it. And I think in my memory, it is like we were talking about last week with Edward Scissorhands, a beloved classic.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, rewatching it, I noticed a bunch of like lines and quotes that in my brain I had attributed to other movies. And I'm like, oh, that's a Highlander quote.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just spoil my response to it. I loved it. I had forgotten, I think when I was a kid, I didn't clock how cheesy the dialogue is. I mean, it's really like it was, in many places, it was really like the dialogue was written by a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
The way men talk to women and the way men talk to each other and the way the exposition unfolds is incredibly corny a lot of the time. And I think so much so that it might even be movie. It's certainly eye rollable. It might even be movie ruiningly bad, except for so many other aspects of the film that I just think are absolutely winning and beloved to my heart. And before I dive into those things, what are your top level impressions of it?
So, one thing that I realized is I think I had only seen this once before. I felt like this is a movie that I probably had watched multiple times, but I was, it could have just escaped my memory. I remember clearly seeing it the first time. I watched it with some friends. I had some friends growing up who recorded everything from HBO, like all the time. And they had all of these just collection of videotapes of just all these movies they would record off of HBO and other movie channels. And I always thought it was funny because their dad had like a cabinet that he would put all these movies in because he was worried that the FBI was going to come. And it was like,
movie police.
Yeah, I think, that only happens if you're selling the movies. I don't think they just randomly go to people's, it wasn't like there wasn't.
They've got time. I mean,
I guess
else,
so.
what else are they doing?
They just go door to door. Any movies that you've illegally recorded? But anyway, even as a kid, I thought that was really funny. I was just like, I don't think they're going to come. Interpol isn't going to show up or whatever. but anyway, so I have this somewhat clear memory of watching it at their house, but I realized that I didn't remember very much about this. I remembered a little bit of the interaction with him and Sean Connery. I remember Clancy Brown as the villain Kurgan, and he is fantastic. I mean,
almost steals the movie. And
yeah.
That's saying something in a movie with Sean Connery in it.
Yeah. But Clancy Brown is great. And I remember, I remembered him pretty clearly. And I remember being like scared by him as a kid. And he is scary, like you said, it's corny. It definitely has a layer of 80s cheese to it. It just feels a lot like an 80s action movie in that regard, which I guess it is, but it's sort of, I don't know what exactly you would categorize this as: science fiction, fantasy, action. I don't know what
it's a little bit all muddled together.
Yeah, I don't know what it's listed as. It's action, adventure, and fantasy on IMDb. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fun watch. Like I say, I don't think I either didn't remember or I didn't really realize the cheesiness of it. Watching as a kid. I like the conceit of one thing that I didn't remember this from the movie. I remember this from so last week on the episode of Edward Scissorhands, we talked about this some, and I think I've only seen the first movie. If I've seen any of the sequels, I do not remember them, but I did watch the TV show, and I didn't know that in this original movie they had the same conceit of him being an antiques collector, which I've always thought that's a neat thing to do with, somebody's immortal. That just really makes sense, that's a great way to make money.
It's firsthand knowledge of the, and also a collector. So you just, that'll be worth something someday.
Yeah.
I'm immortal, so just hang on to that.
And, Sean Connery is just great in this. He's so charming. Sean Connery in movies, sometimes he can be kind of a curmudgeon, but in this, he's just so charming and fun, and then he
doesn't demand a lot of him. He just gets to be this swashbuckling, charismatic, he's not in the movie long, but he's one of the more memorable parts of the movie. And I think that he does so much work in the short amount of time that he has that he kind of makes the movie legit in many ways.
Right. Yeah. He adds a gravitas to it, or gravitas. Another thing that I liked about this that I had forgotten, I had kind of remembered it as being the Scottish scenes were just at the beginning, and then the rest was in present day. enjoyed how they cut back and forth between,
Mhm.
and they had some neat transitions with how they did that. I remember very early on when he has the first battle with this guy in a parking garage, and that scene ends, and they just sort of scroll up through the floor of the parking garage, and then that turns into the grass of Scotland. I thought
Mhm.
that was a cool,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's a fun it's a fun movie. Like I say, Christopher Lambert has this really bad accent, and kind
That
of
comes and
interesting.
goes. Like, it's a
Yeah.
French accent.
Hmm.
He's a Scottish Highlander, ostensibly,
Hmm.
that has somewhere along the line picked up a French accent. Although sometimes in the flashbacks, he does a little Scottish accent work, like when
Hmm.
he's talking to his wife, and so
Hmm.
that's all over the place. But whatever, it doesn't ruin it. You
No.
notice it, like Doug Burnside was talking about last week.
Hmm.
It's one of those little things that those of us with a certain kind of brain are like, so if he's, and then you're like, whatever. Like, the whole thing to me is so much fun
Yeah.
that I let go of that. Like, the parking garage is the parking garage beneath a pro wrestling match,
Hmm.
which feels so 80s. Like, it's so Hulk Hogan, like WrestleMania, and the energy of that is super kinetic. And then we go down into the bowels of this parking garage underneath, and these two guys, one in a trench coat and the other in a business suit, have a sword fight among the cars. And you're
Hmm.
just like, what am I watching here? Right?
And there were several things that I noticed about that really made me laugh. The wrestling thing, I just, I haven't watched, I watched wrestling back then some when I was a kid, when, the Hulk Hogan days and all that stuff. And, didn't, I don't think, I think I lost interest in that at about 13 or something. But it was really funny to watch these wrestlers because they were all these just kind of flabby dad bods.
Right.
None of them looked like in shape at all. I
Well,
didn't
this
think.
was early 80s. This was
Yeah.
not The Rock and John Cena.
No, and it's just like everybody now would be super ripped and, all on steroids and everything. So I thought that was funny. And then the battle in the parking garage. So he's battling this guy who, I don't know, looked like he was, I guess he's hundreds of years old, but he looked like he was in his 50s. And there were some great scenes where the guy's somersaulting through the
Right.
part, and it was not that guy,
Right.
not that actor. That made me laugh.
I think at the time, they probably didn't have a huge budget for this movie and whatever. I think in retrospect, after seeing like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and after watching sword play movies where you've got a true master of swordplay choreographing sword fights, and you've got
Mhm.
money spent on actors learning enough swordplay to do the choreography that this sword master has choreographed.
Mhm.
Like, we've seen sci-fi stuff and fantasy stuff in which the swordplay is convincing.
Yeah.
In this movie, it looks like really B-rate stage, almost like high school sword fight, where it's
Mhm.
like swing left, block, swing right, block, swing head, block, backflip. It's like watching a 32-bit, it's like a Street Fighter moves,
Yeah.
body blow, duck, sweep the leg. It just felt so corny. And I thought that there was just, if I was ever tasked with remaking this, there's a lot of stuff I would strive to do the same, but the sword fighting, I would bother to make it look like these guys had been doing this for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And each one of them had their own style. Like, oh, he fights in the Italian style and he, whatever, but they'd be really good at it.
Mhm.
They'd be really good at it because it's a chance to make something, a very specific thing, super thrilling. Right. And so the combat choreography, kind of a dud, but
I think it's fun. That clunky,
it is
the
fun.
clunky sword fighting, there's a certain charm to that. It's
And
almost,
it still tells the story.
yeah, yeah. It almost, I mean, it kind of makes me think of when we were kids and we would do Super
Yep.
8 movies in your backyard. You
Yep.
know, it almost had that kind of feel to it. But it's not a
Exactly.
cheap looking. I mean, it looks similar to other movies of its era. You know, it doesn't look.
Right.
It's well filmed and, you know, well put together. I checked they're listing the budget at 19 million, and it only brought in 12 million worldwide, but it must have been a huge video, you know, for it to have spawned a bunch of sequels.
It
You know,
must
must
have.
made a bunch of money on home video.
I think at the time there was definitely a kind of movie that didn't do well in Ace Ventura, perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nobody heard of it. Nobody went to see it. What's that? Right?
I
Who's
actually
that
saw that in
dude?
the movie theater.
Well,
And that's
great.
I laughed
but-
so hard, and that's one of the I can't recall too many times where I've laughed harder than that in a theater.
It was on. I think Ace Ventura 2 was on. A
Probably
couple
doesn't
of
hold
summers
up
ago,
well,
it was
but
on TV, and one of my kids was having kind of a meltdown, and so
Mhm.
we went inside and just sat down to kind of calm down and cool off and drink some water and just put on the TV and let our brain calm down. And that's Ace Ventura 2 was on,
Mhm.
and it was censored because it was just on TV and there were commercials. But the two of us ended up laughing so hard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I said, I gotta check and see how appropriate this is we gotta watch the original one because it's so dumb funny.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
so
yeah.
dumb funny. But my point with that was it didn't do well in the theaters at all. But then
Mhm.
when it hit video, it broke all kinds of records, I think, in
Yeah.
terms of
That makes sense.
you know, people checking it out and building a fan base. And this is exactly that kind of a movie. It's like, wouldn't you're like, huh, what? Why would you buy a ticket necessarily to see Highlander in the theater? But great rental,
Oh, yeah.
great rental. And just to move on to some of the other things that I think about it are great. There that like you talked about that wipe up, you know, that transition back in time. There is some amazing set design in this movie.
Mhm.
The Scottish stuff is spectacular. And just a lot of the exteriors, like some great shots when he and Connery are on the beach and, you know, experiencing the quickening or whatever. And it's just, makes on screen a lot of times, especially in these exteriors, it's a much more mature looking movie than the dialogue would expect it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
And I think a lot of the costume design is great too. It's smart enough to be authentic feeling and then also tie in the kind of juvenile nature of the dialogue aspect of the storytelling. Like when he Clan MacLeod or whatever, and they're going to battle and it's a big battle sequence. And basically they're just a bunch of Scots fighting each other and they're all hairy and draped in tartan and everything else. So what they did in the costume, they made a sort of a red team and a blue team. Like
Mhm.
one of them, or I think it's kind of yellow and green. I don't remember, but they have these bright primary colors to tell who's Connor MacLeod's team and who the other clan is, right?
Mhm.
As they're fighting. And it's a broad gesture within a more subtle, you know, it's not like Star Trek where it looks like the costume department pulled a bunch of, you know, central casting kilts and just put them, you know, that have never been worn before, right? It actually they're kind of draped with layers and furs and they're carrying a cross that looks like it's handmade. And you know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
spent some time on the detail work.
Right.
And the other thing I really love about this movie is the concept of, so his friend Sean Connery is a guy named Ramirez, right? Who's actually Egyptian.
I liked that he's Egyptian,
Yeah,
and it's just Sean Connery's voice.
and is older, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So they try to sort of create these layers of things that sort of stick. And I think that's kind of true, especially when you're a teenager, you're kind of trying on different things and you're finding the things that you feel like you like, that you feel like you wear well, and you kind of keep that thing. And it becomes, now that we're all pushing 50, there's like these elements of stuff that we've just stuck with because you're like, nope, I like that. And that's good enough for me. I'm going to stick with that. I don't need new stuff in that particular category.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And he wears what he wears is a kind of an Elizabethan or Spanish era, like doublet. It's a big embroidered scarlet and gold thing with big poofy shoulders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has a
Big hat.
big hat and a big teardrop shaped pearl earring he wears in one ear. You know, he has a ponytail and it's sort of a Spanish goatee. And his name is Ramirez, but he's Egyptian and he goes all the way back. And he tries to warn Connor McLeod, who is relatively young to this, about the dangers of falling in love and the heartbreak. And, you know, you're not going to die. You're going to watch her get old. You're never going to love that. Of course, a wiser man would understand that you can't warn a younger man off of that first love. But so it's rich in those ways, I think. And I find that really, really enjoyable. And that's carried through in the fact that he's an antiquities dealer, right?
Yeah.
And he has this sort of moneypenny secretary, right? That we discover he rescues in Belgium or something in World War II. He finds this little girl whose parents have been killed. Am I misremembering this? And
no,
he takes her in, and we realize later, now in the 80s, she's in her 60s or 70s even, and she was his kind of ward, and she's become his secretary, and she knows his secret. But she's still with him, and we get that tells this story. You know, it illustrates that this is a guy that builds meaningful, long-lasting relationships with people. He's mostly a loner, but he has these close connections, right?
Right.
It's how we paint him as a good guy. And then the Kurgan, or the Kirgan, however it's pronounced, is this really ferocious guy who, quite the opposite, doesn't form these personal connections and kind of burns his way through life. But he has this sword fight with Sean Connery at one point where Sean Connery makes a good cut and he gives him a good slice in the neck. And later in the 80s, he has shaved his head and he's put a bunch of baby pins through the slice in his neck, through the scar in his neck.
Yeah.
And it's really intimidating.
Oh, yeah.
He's a big guy, but it's just really great.
But he's like this punk rock guy now, kind of.
In Scottish times, he's wearing almost this medieval, I think they say he's Romanian or something, but it's almost this medieval armor. It's a helmet that looks kind of like an animal skull. And
I really like the design of that.
Yeah, it's really scary.
Scary. Yeah.
It's very D&D.
Yes.
And so in the 80s, his look is like shaved head, leather motorcycle jacket, muscle car, bobby pins through the scar.
Yeah.
You're just like, great design.
Yeah.
Great design. And he does a great vocal thing later after he gets his throat cut. He's a big bass guy anyway, but after he gets his throat cut, he gets this kind of vocal fry, McLeod, Highlander. It's just great. It's just great stuff.
I love the scene where they're in the church and the nuns walk by and he's like, he says something like, he says something like, have a great Halloween, ladies, or something like that. And then he like sticks his tongue out at him and flicks it around. Yeah. Yeah.
Nuns, no sense of humor.
He's just this was and I looked through his filmography, and he'd done 4 or 5 movies before this. One was Buckaroo Banzai, which we covered.
Right.
But this was the first thing that I had ever seen him in. And I was just like, man, this guy is really, really creepy, you know? And
really
but he's
having fun with it too. Like a villain you love to hate, like you're enjoying watching him.
Yeah. But he's such a, he's had a long, long career, and he and such a varied career, because he's been villains, but he's been, he can be charming and likable, and
he was
all that
he
too.
was in John Dies at the End. Like he's been in a number of movies.
Very good in that.
He's got a big voiceover career, as I was mentioning before we started recording. He's Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob. He's that voice, and I think once you start to recognize his voice, you kind of hear him all over the place. And you see
Yeah.
him. He still does live action stuff too a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he has an insane number of credits too. 297 acting credits.
Awesome. He just
Yeah.
must be a nice guy. Like, I don't think you work that much. It's a fairly small business, really.
Mhm.
And if you're a character actor that has a lot of range and is nice to work with, I think and you're willing to work a lot, I think you just get a ton of work. And that's what I see when I see that many credits on an actor like this, that he just must be a genuinely friendly, fun to work with guy.
Yeah, I was just I just kind of randomly saw it. I was down the YouTube rabbit hole and I saw an interview with him, a fairly recent one. I don't know what he was. I don't even know if he was plugging anything or not. But he just seemed like a really, really nice guy. Somebody that could be. He's a big guy and has that voice and everything, and
Yeah.
obviously, as we said, could be very intimidating. But just seemed
Also,
like a
he
super
could
nice
do
guy.
his range is huge though, because he could do Gentle Giant if you wanted him to.
Right.
Right. What I learned from Tom Seymour, of course, who an independent filmmaker, is he got oh man, I don't know. I get rolling and I space on names, and it's such a shame. He did a film called London Betty, and he got
Is it Debbie Rochon?
no, he has worked
Oh,
with Debbie Rochon,
yeah.
but that's a pretty good example. But this is a guy that you would recognize a lot, and he got him for a bit part. He was an older guy, totally recognizable. Like you would see him and you'd be, oh yeah, that guy. But you might not know his name, and I'm ashamed that I can't remember his name now, because he came in for one day, and I think Tom paid him, I don't know, maybe it was $1,000, maybe it was $3,000 for just a day, and they shot
Clint
out.
Howard.
No, although they
Oh,
got
okay.
Clint Howard to narrate.
Oh, okay.
They got Clint Howard to narrate on a similar deal, just to lay down some audio tracks as a narrator, and that was a great grab. My point is, I wonder what his day rate is, because if you're an independent filmmaker and you can scrape up a little money, but you don't have millions to make a big thing, you can often reach out to these great character people who just love to work. They just love to work. And if you got something juicy for them to do, you might be able to get them. You might be able to get them to come and shoot for a day or two, and you might be able to afford their day rate if you can organize your shoot such that you just, and you sprinkle it out through the movie. So there may be in 4 scenes, boom, 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 throughout the course of the film, and you give them something meaty, and you can get that all shot in a very short period of time. And it raises the bar on your whole production.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because everybody sees that, and it's inspiring.
Oh, yeah.
It's inspiring to get to work with somebody like that. And you're like, oh, man, yeah. And it's inspiring to get a pro, Not that
Sure.
independent and amateur film people aren't good at what they do, but seeing an actual seasoned pro, like bringing that into your thing. I was watching some of The Hobbit the other night, just because I kind of went down I smoked a little rope and I was just trying to find something to watch. And I started watching The Hobbit, which I didn't really dig when it first came out, but Ian McKellen, man, what?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. Like, I think that if you didn't have Ian McKellen as Gandalf, not that obviously everybody delivers in that franchise, but he is the kind of heart and soul of it. He's the kind of Arkenstone of that whole enterprise. Like, he so gets Peter Jackson's vision, and Gandalf is this kind of thread that runs through the entire Tolkien everything. It's kind of Tolkien's soul, and he's the guy that delivers the moral platitudes, and Ian McKellen just nails it.
Oh, yeah.
Just nails it. It's such a pleasure. And I thought to myself, I would love to work with that guy. Like, I would just getting to, it would raise, whatever he gave you as an actor, you would meet that. You would rise to meet that. And it would be,
oh, how
such
amazing
pleasure.
would that be?
Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing, and this ties back in with tonight's movie. Did you know that Ian McKellen was not the first choice for Gandalf?
Who was, though?
Sean Connery was, and
Oh, interesting. That would
he
have been
turned it
so
down.
interesting.
Yeah. He would have done a great job, but it just would have been different, you know.
It would have been very different. Very,
But
very different.
I don't know what the reason was that he turned it down, but he did.
I read, now that you say that, I read something like he just didn't get it. You know, like
Maybe
it just
maybe
didn't
that was
click.
the case.
I don't know that the deep fantasy thing, and you'd have to be excited to be offered that role. And it felt like Ian McKellen was.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder when you look at Sean Connery's filmography, it's a little bit funny in a way that he did a film like Highlander, because that's, you know, that's very much in that fantasy kind of realm and everything. And I wonder if it's just, you know, it's kind of like
He's comfortable with the fantasy material.
Yeah.
Zardoz, like he's comfortable. He doesn't turn up his nose at it.
But I wonder if maybe that changed some as he aged or something. Because it's
Maybe.
kind of the same thing where you look at Harrison Ford, who you know, took a lot of chances when he was young, and then as he aged, he got, you know, it was pretty predictable, the things that he
Yeah.
was doing, you know.
And yet, I think now, as he's in his kind of, I don't want to use an offensive term, but golden, like older
kind of
years,
twilight years, yeah.
I feel like we as people go through a thing where there's this sort of pride that flares up as our middle age rears its head. We sort of like, no, I'm the serious guy. I'm making a mark, right? And then we kind of move through that into a more graceful, you know what I mean? We kind of realize, okay, well, there was a silliness in our youth, and there was actually a silliness in our middle age. And it's just kind of like, you know, I'm not a clown now, but I'm, you know, if I'm excited about it and I can really commit to it and do it, then I'll do it. And otherwise, it's not, maybe a no, but it's not like this rigid, like, no, I'm a serious, you know, it's just what you get excited about. And I feel like he's come back. He came back to Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which I think for a while he was kind of embarrassed about, even.
Yeah. Yeah. He
But
always
he
seemed to be.
really, I don't think that episode 7 would have flown without Harrison Ford's buy-in, and he really bought into it.
Yeah,
I
he
know,
did not.
they paid him a treasure trove. I think they paid him
Yeah.
$20 million.
Yeah.
But he showed up.
He didn't phone it in. That was
No,
for sure.
he showed up. And that was Han Solo, man. We needed some Han Solo, and we got it.
Yeah. Which I'm hoping with this next Indiana Jones that we've discussed a little bit, that he will not phone it in on that one.
I don't know. Hopefully he's, I don't know.
I feel good that it's, I think if it had been, if Spielberg had come back, I don't think his heart's in it anymore. I don't think his heart has been in those kind of movies for a long time. But I think I believe it's James Mangold who is doing it, you know, who directed Logan and Ford versus Ferrari. I think that's a guy who's got some fire, you know, still.
You know, I did IT support for his parents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Crazy, just coincidence, just hot minute there when I was still in New York and his parents were kind of upstate. And the Mangolds were the sweetest folks. They're artists, and I mean, and I'm an IT consultant. It's what I do for my bread and butter. And I went to their house, and they were sending me Christmas cards for a while. And then my relationship with the guy that was my connection to them changed, and when I moved. But they're like, oh yeah, our son does movies. And I didn't know at the time, I didn't know James Mangold's work yet at the time, but he does great stuff. Like he's a really terrific director. Ford versus Ferrari, I think, is terrific.
Oh, it's fantastic. I really love it.
And the Wolverine movies, I think, are great.
Yeah.
I mean, the ones that he directed.
Yes.
There's that one that's a little weird with the samurai stuff, but it's better than the predecessor. But Logan
was great.
Is really interesting. And maybe we should talk about that sometime.
That would be fun. I'd like to I only watched it just the one time, so it would be fun to revisit. Yeah.
It's really grown up and interesting. And it's, for a comic book movie, it's quite dark. Like there are a lot of endings in it. And you're just like, oh snap, like that feels final in a way that you don't usually get from, like, even in comic book movies, Captain America dies and you're like, I don't know. Superman dies and you're like, he'll come back. But in Logan, you're just kind of like, I think that's it. You know, I mean, the studio's not going to let go of that character. They're going to
No.
do other things with that character. But for now, I think he's dead. You know, and
Yeah.
you're like, wow, that's kind of.
I think with Indiana Jones, I think they're going to go pretty lighthearted and comedic. But I would like to see an Indiana Jones version of Logan. Basically, I would be
Yeah.
fine with
Yeah.
him dying at the end. I think that would just be a great way to finish it. You know,
I agree because, and if you want to keep the franchise going, if you that's a hat trick that's up to the studio to pull off, right? But if they want to keep it going and they can make a good, and they can, then more power to them. But I'm a little skeptical because that's a big lift. I think one of the things that I loved about Indiana Jones was how human Harrison Ford made that hero.
Yeah.
He was genuinely afraid many times. You know what I mean? Like he was not this indomitable character. He put himself in real life or death situations, and you saw real fear in that character's eyes. And sometimes they were very human, irrational fears, like particularly of asps.
Yeah.
You know? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to me, that you have to give a character like that a human death. Like nobody lives forever. He is not a mutant or a superhero or an alien or whatever. He's a man. And it would be great to see, the Crystal Skull was Spielberg, so it's hard to say it's a bad movie. I don't know that Spielberg has made any bad movies, but some of them are certainly not as good as others.
Not as good as his other work. Yeah,
But we've discussed some bad movies.
Oh yeah, his aren't in that category. But
I didn't feel that Crystal Skull was up to the standard of the other ones, though.
Again, I don't think he had his heart in it. I think he'd kind of I heard some comments, read some comments from him that he felt like he got to and it wasn't specifically talking about that movie, but he got to a point with action stuff that he felt like he could do it in his sleep, and I just don't think he was excited about it. So I think this is exciting that they're kind of passing the torch to somebody else. I don't think it would have ever gotten made. It's still up in the air, I suppose, if it'll happen. You wait till they actually start filming, but it looks like it's going to go forward. But one thing that you brought up there with and we're kind of far afield now, but one thing that you brought up there with Indiana Jones that is a thing that bothers me about today's action movies that makes it difficult for me to really connect with them is even, we had these cartoonish characters, Arnold and Stallone and all of them back at that time. But you look at something like the original Die Hard, and there are a lot of crazy things that happen in it, but it still feels like these are things that a human could do. It's possible that a guy could be on top of a skyscraper and, wrap a fire hose around himself and jump, down to several stories or whatever. Probably wouldn't live. He probably would die. Right. But it's not totally beyond the realm of possibility. Right. But
then the movie makes it feel at least plausible.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Improbable, but plausible. Now, I think probably a physicist or I don't know, they would be like, yeah, that wouldn't happen. But the movie makes it feel plausible.
Yeah. But with and I'm gonna sound, this is gonna be like a stay off my lawn kind of a thing, but you get to the Fast and the Furious, and I cannot connect with those movies. And even the later Die Hard movies that they did, they did the same thing where it's like, okay, we're going to drive a car out of an airplane, and then we're going to crash through a building and land in the next. And it's just like, okay, these things are completely impossible. These aren't superheroes. These are humans, and it's just like I forget which one it is, but there's a scene in one of the Die Hards, one of the later ones, that was made like in the 2000s, where there's a fighter jet shooting at him and he's running like down a freeway and the fighter jet is shooting and he doesn't it's just like, you would just be dead.
Well, I mean, Bruce Willis is a different dude, right? I mean, I think in Die Hard, he was a young man. He was hungry. He was hungry.
Oh yeah. He's definitely somebody who's been phoning things in for a long time.
And he's funny. and he's good. And I don't want to knock Bruce Willis, but I also think he's probably got an ego, and there's a reason you don't see Bruce Willis in a ton of stuff right now.
There's
And
been some bad stories about
did you
him,
see
know.
Looper?
I did. Looper was awesome.
Looper was really interesting. We ought to talk about Looper.
Yeah, Looper would be
because
fun.
there's a
I like
lot.
Looper.
There's a lot to talk about in Looper.
Sure.
But he actually kind of shows up in that. He
does, yeah.
He doesn't carry that movie. That's mostly Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who is hungry, or at least when he did that movie, he's hungry. But Bruce Willis actually shows up in that, and when he shows up, he's great. I don't know what he's like to work with, but when he shows up, he's great. You know,
have we ever talked about 12 Monkeys? 12 Monkeys would be
a little bit. We should do that because you bring it up a lot, and I have seen it. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I do love Terry Gilliam.
Yeah, it's he puts in a tremendous performance in that. I think he's really, really. He and Brad Pitt both are. Well, Brad Pitt was nominated for an Oscar, but they're both really good in that. So you see. You know, it's not, to me, it's not just, him just being himself, Bruce Willis,
We ought to put that in the hopper. And I think at the end here, we'll have a lively debate about what to do for next episode. But just to bring it back briefly to Highlander.
Yeah. We need to talk more about
Queen
Highlander.
soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
You know, right? So we did Flash Gordon, Queen soundtrack, but Queen, I just think you take any movie, you get Queen to do the soundtrack, it bumps it up 3 or 4 notches right there. There's a scene where the Kiergan is in the 80s. He's modern. He's in a muscle car. It's a big red muscle car. He's coming across, I think, the Brooklyn or the Manhattan Bridge. He puts a cassette in the cassette deck. It's Queen. It's a custom song, and he's blasting Queen. Man, I mean, I wanted to just grab some like weights and start doing curls. I'm like, yeah, 80s rock and roll Queen is boom. So this whole thing, it's a powerhouse. I wish the dialogue had not been so corny, but everything else in the movie kind of comes together. The concept of it, it's this undefined race of people who have, how were they, like sequels try and explain this, and it's a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But what we know from this movie is that there's these certain people on Earth that are this other people for whatever reason. They're immortal. The only way you can kill them is to chop off their heads. And basically only each other, they fight until there's only one left. And when special guy A kills special guy B, cuts off his head in a sword fight, there's this sort of electrical disturbance, and he kind of absorbs all the collected power of that guy. So it's this tournament that winnows itself down to one, in which all of that collects in the final winner. And at the time of this movie, it's really Colin McLeod, who's the Highlander. That's we follow him. And then there's Sean Connery, whom we meet when he was a Highlander, just learning that he's part of this thing. We meet a couple of the dude. We meet the dude in the garage that we don't know more about than he's a other fella that the Highlander beats. We meet the Kurgan, who we see early on in Highlander's career. The Kurgan actually kills Sean Connery, who is Colin McLeod's mentor. So they're sort of good guys that bond together, although they know ultimately, like if it came down to Sean Connery and Colin McLeod, one of them they'd have to fight to the death eventually. But of course it comes down to and there's a kind of an African guy that Colin McLeod meets in New York, and they have a, hearty welcome. And then it turns out the Kiergan kills that guy, and it ends up coming down to Colin McLeod and the Kiergan, as we know it will, right? We know kind of from the beginning, that's how it's going to fall out. It's not a complicated structure. But we don't know where they come from or why is this happening or what. We do get when Colin McLeod wins, he's fallen in love with this woman that he's met. And it's a special feeling, right? You get the sense that he doesn't really get attached much, but there's something about And somehow the 80s dialogue cheese kind of meets up with this great concept, and you sort of go with it. And he shows up for a date with her, and he's in this kind of, I don't know,
The sweater
80s.
and like a
Exactly.
button-up shirt under
He's
it.
got a box of chocolates and a
Mhm.
bottle of wine. But what I love about it, and they're wrapped up,
Mhm.
but what I love about it is how old-fashioned that is. And then when he unwraps the bottle of wine, it turns out to be a brandy or something that's from like 17, whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, snap." Like, I would like, "Get out of here, lady. I'd like to drink that bottle of brandy with Colin McLeod."
Just
Like,
drink it by myself.
exactly. Like, that's awesome. Like, that's dope. So there's this crazy, like, deep cut kind of concepts throughout it that make it super fun. But she's also an antiquities person. Like, she recognizes the sword he uses.
Yeah, and it's worth like $1 million or something.
Right. And at some point he was in love with this sort of Japanese woman whose father was a great sword maker, and their love was true and powerful. So this great sword maker folded this, samurai sword 200 times. And she's like, this is crazy ahead of its time. Like, she recognizes that, and the nerd part of you really connects with that and geeks out with that. Like, she gets it,
Yeah.
and recognizes there's something special about this guy. And I don't think he does a bad job. His accent is funny.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the charisma of Sean Connery or of the Kiergan, but he does well enough that he anchors the film.
Right.
Right? Like, I don't know anything else he's ever acted in. But
he has over 100 credits.
Fine.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to diss the guy.
Oh, no,
I'm just saying I don't know him.
I think he kind of built a career off of this. I mean,
and he certainly does well enough to keep this movie from caving in at the middle. But it's the supporting cast. He's just the spine around which all the rest of this crazy animal is built. And with the Queen soundtrack and the great set design and the high concept and the excellent supporting performances, I'm like, I gotta say, I mega recommend it. Like, it's just still one of my favorites,
Sure. Yeah, it holds up well. A couple of things. I start watching the movie. So I watched it on so for people who have it, this is on Amazon Prime. So you can watch it for free. And I watched it. Usually I watch it on my TV at home, but I watched it on computer. And so if you watch on the computer, it has all these little pop-up things, little trivia things. So the movie starts and it has just begun, and it starts talking about Queen. And I was like, holy shit, I completely forgot about the Queen music in this. So it's like the princes of it's like the princes of the universe, which I think that's been like used in commercials over the years and all that.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh, I totally forgot about Queen.
It's Queen.
And this is Queen. This is 80s Queen. So this is kind of the butt rock Queen era, you know what I mean? Where it's not really the operatic Queen. It's cheesy Queen, but
Power
it's still
chords.
really it's like this is kind of like
a gig. This is a gig they were paid to do.
Yeah.
So they show up in a real 80s way, and they're like, as much as Queen is, it's like pro wrestling, muscle cars, sword fights. It's very Flash Gordon in that way. It's like,
exactly.
Space movie. He's a hero. It's awesome. It's awesome.
It works so well with this. And another thing that I was thinking about, and this is an impossible thing to answer. We'd have to get somebody older than us to.
I think, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry. I think I'm going to try and find some of that music, and I'm going to tack it onto the end.
Oh, that'd be great.
Stick around for the end. I'm just going to put some of that muscle Queen right at the end so you get a taste of it. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So we'd have to talk to somebody older than us. But I wonder if, we were kids when all these movies were coming out. 85, 86, this I feel like was this real formative time, in my life. And I'm sure we didn't it probably didn't seem cheesy to us. The dialogue probably didn't seem bad, But I wonder if somebody who was,
At the time, no, I was like, this is great.
yeah, but I wonder if somebody who was 30 who watched Highlander in 1986 was rolling their eyes at this dialogue, or if it was just a different era.
They had
And
to have been.
yeah, I
It's
would think so.
really dumb.
Yeah.
it's really dumb. They had to have been. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Even now, you're kind of like, at the time, I could have written better dialogue.
Sure. Yeah. But it was, there was, one of the things that's fun about the 80s was there wasn't a lot of irony. They may have thought, wow, this dialogue is cool, at the time. I don't know. But
That's right. There was a lot of sarcasm,
Mhm.
but there was not a lot of irony.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But
you make excellent points.
Thank you. You as well. But the 80s, again, it was like everything is irony now. You know what I mean? They would,
I know, and I hate it.
yeah, they would do Highlander now, and they would purposely put cheesy one-liners and things.
I know.
In it, I would think.
And I hate it because it's so much of it is they do it wrong. I'm like, that's not ironic.
Yeah.
You're just being a dick. Like that's just mean. That's not an you know what I mean? Like people think they understand what irony is. It's like,
and the 80s hair and everything.
That was in earnest. They're like, this looks great.
Yeah, this is super cool. So that's another.
And part of why you go with it is you're like, wow, you literally look like a peacock, but you're so confident.
Yeah.
That somehow I'm on board.
Yeah,
exactly. Like I don't like it. I'll tell you right now. I'll sign my name on it. I do not like that haircut.
Yeah,
but I'm listening.
Yeah.
They just sold it so hard, and it was probably all coke.
Oh yeah, that's my theory on everything with 80s. It was just all coke. I'm gonna write that. If somebody doesn't do it, I'm going to write a book about the influence of cocaine on, because it just had to be at every level.
Popular culture, yeah.
And that's the thing. I have we maybe discussed this. I don't know. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I know on some of those SNL movies, that like Chevy Chase and Belushi and Aykroyd and stuff, they literally had cocaine worked into the budget of the film. So
I don't condone it in any way, shape, or form, but I think they were also genuinely funny people.
Yeah, and I think you got great. It's kind of like without the psychedelics and everything, would the 60s have produced the music that it did? Probably not. So you can't separate the the drugs from the, again, not condoning it, but I think that's.
Well, you look at Chris Farley too, the tragic case of a guy who was hilariously funny in and of, just in his own right, but also had an addiction to cocaine.
Yeah.
And I think when you're genuinely a fast, quick-witted, funny person, I've never been tempted to try cocaine because I figured I'd love it.
Yeah.
I would feel like I'm a super genius. Like everything I say is great, but it's a very slippery slope into addiction. And
yeah,
he was funny anyway. And I think he probably felt like coke made him even funnier.
Oh, I'm sure. And also, I wonder, again, I'm not saying like it should, it's never totally gone away, I don't think, but I'm not saying it should come back, but we got a lot of these crazy movies, I think, because of that, and everything now is so safe. I think a little bit of coke might help, with the executives and stuff, help make, make some weird movies again. But
well, I will say on coke aside, I think that what we're seeing, what we've talked about it also a little bit on other podcasts, is the shift from the studio model to the streaming model. And juggernauts like Netflix and Hulu and HBO willing to pay for auteurs to come in and pick up a risky property or something that's not obviously a slam dunk.
Right.
It's not cocaine per se, but it is this opportunity for someone who wants to kind of make their own mark to do something weird and outside of the box. I don't know if you ever watched on Netflix. There's a show called The Witcher.
We talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
I believe I've not
It's
actually
Henry
seen it.
Cavill or Cavill
Yeah.
or whatever his name is. Superman is a very different part for him.
Mhm.
It's deep video game level fantasy. And I think it was, in fact, a video game. I think it's a series based on a video game or something.
Yeah.
It's very strange, but some of it is really interesting. You know, it's not a full-fledged recommendation, but they're taking that kind of risk to be like, I don't know, let's throw this at the wall and see if it sticks. And they'll throw a lot of money at it, and they'll find some real talent to give it a shot. And
Well, who
some
would
of
have
it's really interesting.
who would have ever guessed? And this is not something that I think, unless they did it in a low budget capacity, this is not something that a studio would say, okay, this is, we're going to release this in the theater. This is going to be a big tentpole production or whatever. And I didn't watch it, but I mean, it seems like it was a quality show. But The Queen's Gambit, who
Right.
would have thought
Right.
that a movie or a series rather about chess based on a book that was written in the 80s would have been this giant, phenom, phenomenon. I don't know.
I watched it. I
Yeah.
watched it all the way through.
Yeah. So that shows again like you said, it's really interesting with Amazon and these other streaming networks that they're just throwing stuff out, and some of it's The Queen's Gambit, and some
Right.
of it is the next Adam Sandler thing.
Well,
and
that's also
the
kind of
audience
like-
decides what
Yeah.
is going to be a hit.
Right. I think they're willing to play a little loose with the algorithm,
Mm-hmm.
and they're willing to take some chances because they also need content, right? The
Yeah.
part of the race right now is not only creating good content, but creating really broad content,
Mm-hmm.
right? I had a Hulu thing running from Akira or something we watched, and I just canceled it rather than pay another month.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all these screens of like, you sure you want to go? Don't go. And they're always talking about how they're adding more and more stuff. And there's lots of things you haven't explored. So a big selling point of these platforms is, like you talk about that guy, a friend's dad with a case of pirated
Movies, yeah.
VHSs. They're saying, we got a really big case of movies. Like, we got lots of stuff
Mm-hmm.
in here that you haven't explored yet. And they're all trying to be your new library. And it's happening with music too, Apple Music and Amazon Music and Spotify, and
Sure.
they all want to be your streaming service for your one-stop shop.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's good for the consumer in many ways.
Oh,
because
yeah.
It drives not only them to be aggressive about the accumulation of content, but I think that the smart ones are realizing that if we can make our own new content, that is dynamite. It's exclusive. We own it, and that will draw people. Game of Thrones, perfect example, HBO.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you want to watch Game of Thrones? We've got it on HBO.
Mm-hmm.
You got to come here and see it,
And I think the thing that's interesting is that, these Netflix and the like have these giant audiences, so they're appealing to the masses to a degree, but it turns out the audience is a little bit smarter than maybe what you would think they are. Not to pick on him, but the Adam Sandler movies are huge, and I think they're terrible. These newer ones. He's got his thing figured out and his audience and everything, and that's fine. But again, something like The Queen's Gambit, it's kind of this unconventional thing, found a huge audience. And I think that's really, really interesting that people don't just want a steady diet of Fast and the Furious and Adam Sandler. They like, people like diversity, I guess.
Well, they like to have options.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think The Queen's Gambit had to have been something of a surprise.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think they
that's what I'm
wouldn't have
saying.
done it if they didn't think it would find an audience. But the fact that it found such an audience must have been like eyebrow raising. Like, great, wow, awesome,
Yeah.
really awesome. I mean,
yeah,
they
absolutely.
must have also been delightedly surprised by because it really did get a lot of views.
Yeah, it was massive. That's something that I need to watch. I thought I was intrigued by it, and I like that that actor and
Yeah,
everything.
I didn't. It didn't. I don't want to say it was this. It didn't land its hooks in me in some kind of crazy evangelistic way, but I did keep coming back.
Mm-hmm.
I just found myself coming back to it. I'm like, oh, there's another episode of that out, and I'd check it out. I got all the way through the series, and I was like, that was good.
Yeah, yeah,
So there you go. I mean, if it's a binary litmus test, I watched the whole thing.
yeah.
I didn't call my friends up and like, you have to watch this thing. But who cares?
Yeah,
Right?
it doesn't matter. That's the thing with all these options that we have now. Two other little minor things that I wanted to say about Highlander. Two little things that I like. So in the end, when he's the one,
Yes.
and it's the prize or whatever, then he gains all the knowledge of the universe or whatever. He can hear
Yeah.
what the presidents are saying and
Right.
are thinking, and all this. I thought that was fun. And then one thing that would definitely change when I'm going to say when they remake this, because this will be remade, I'm certain, is when they have the battles, and especially the big battle at the end where he wins the prize. All of the the kind of white swirly stuff, and it's like monster faces and all these things. That's all hand animated.
Yeah.
Whereas now that would be CGI, and
Right.
that's one of those things that we have. You're never going to see that again. They're never
And I
going to.
didn't understand them. Why are there monsters?
I don't know. But I just like that you're never going to see that stuff again, because that will be computer generated. That's never going to be hand drawn again like it is in this film. And that's just one of those things that just stands out to me as kind of charming. It kind of adds to the charm of the 80s
Yes.
aesthetic.
There is something, it's very childish, but there is something very sincere and very charming about this movie. And I'm just so glad we watched it again. And
Me
I
too.
really enjoyed it. And I think it'd be fun. I mean, you need to be into it, right? I mean, I don't recommend this to people who generally like sports movies. I'm like, well, these guys like it so much, maybe I'll check it out. You have to be kind of into the idea of it's sci-fi, fantasy, action, adventure, 80s, sword fighting, cheese.
Yeah.
Like, if that doesn't sound interesting to you, don't bother. But most of our listeners, I think, are probably, they see what we talk about.
Sure,
I loved it.
Yeah, if you like other stuff that we've covered on here, this is and it's not a bad movie at all. I mean, this is not Kill and Kill Again or something like that we've
Right.
covered. This is it's a quality movie. Just there's 80s cheese to it. I mean, that's hard to avoid, I would say. I don't know how this would play to younger audiences, people that kind of didn't grow up with 80s movies. I mean, I guess if younger people and they're into 80s movies, maybe that would be, I don't know how it would play, but yeah, it's definitely a thumbs up for me. It's a hell of a lot of fun. Well, Sean Connery fans, I mean,
Sure.
who I'm sure that we could, if you hate Sean Connery, send us an email at chrisandchristalkmovies@gmail.com. But because I was going to say, who doesn't love Sean Connery? I'm
Right.
sure there are people out there who don't, but
Sure.
I imagine they're in the minority. So do you want to spitball a little bit?
Yeah, what should we do next? What are you feeling? What's in your gut? We talked about a lot of different things.
One that I was thinking about a little bit recently, and we just did animated, a couple episodes ago. So this is maybe, if this would be something that you'd be interested in watching, maybe this could be a little down the road. Have you ever seen Heavy Metal, the animated?
Pieces of it. Is that Ralph Bakshi?
He may be involved with it. I'm not sure, to be honest, but it's several different stories, and the animation style is maybe a little bit different.
I guess
I don't know that Ralph.
I guess I haven't. I think I've seen clips of it.
That would be a fun one to watch sometime.
Right. Well, let's. What else you got? Do you have other pitches?
I mean, what were the other ones we talked about? We talked about 12 Monkeys. We talked about Logan. We talked about, I forget what the other things that we talked about.
We've got a bunch on our list too. We've got I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe we'll
Don't
take
worry
a
about
look
the
at the
list right
list
now.
and it'll be a surprise.
No, I'd like to
Okay.
figure it out. Let's do heavy
Okay.
metal. I'm just
Okay.
gonna go with my gut. Let's do heavy
Okay.
metal. It's a big crazy choice. That was
Yeah.
the 80s also, right? It's an
Oh, it's
animated.
it's very 80s, and I won't give anything away. I don't want to uh I don't want to taint
It's also
your view.
swords and sorcery, right?
It's there's sci-fi, there's horror in it, there's sword and sorcery. Yeah, it covers a lot of different genres because it's kind of
Anthology.
sort of an anthology. Yeah, there's kind of a through line with it, but it's an anthology with different characters.
Definitely have not seen it then.
Okay, yeah,
Certainly haven't seen it all.
yeah, and
All
you'll
right,
be
so for next time,
surprised
we're
at
going to talk
this.
about heavy
Yeah,
metal.
yeah, that'll be fun. Let's do that.
Dope.
All right.
All right, well, we are a little bit over time and even more because I am going to lead us out with some Queen. I haven't decided what yet, but it's going to rock. So we will talk to you next week. Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. Hit us up. Thank you for joining us for our 50th. We've been doing this for a year,
50.
man.
Isn't that cool?
Pandemic year.
I know. It's been great. Here's to another 50.
This has been a great aspect of a terrible year.
Yeah. For sure. I
All right.
wholeheartedly agree.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to do heavy metal for next time, so check it out with us. Hit us up on all the socials. And we're going to lead out with some Queen, but we will talk to you next week.